My mother secretly copied my house keys and told my sister family helps family, so Emily moved in. Trashed my $340 floors and stole my bedroom. She even called me insane on Instagram to all 47 of her followers while I slept on the couch. But she didn't know I recorded every single violation. At our last family meeting, I slid a black folder across the table and whispered one sentence that made her face turn ashen and the entire room go dead silent. My name is Megan. I'm 28 years old. I work as a dental hygienist, which means I wake up early, I stay on my feet for 8 hours, and I come home tired in a way that feels earned. I'm not complaining about that. I built the life I wanted, one paycheck at a time. I graduated at 24 with a degree, a license, and about $19,000 in student loans. I paid them off in 3 years. At 26, I found the apartment, a one-bedroom on the 3rd floor with good light and original hardwood floors that needed work. I negotiated the lease myself, signed it myself, and moved in with 4 boxes and a second-hand couch. My landlord, Mr. Hargrove, is the kind of man who returns emails within the hour and expects the same in return. We've renewed once. No issues, not once. Over the following 8 months, I put money into that place. I redid the kitchen backsplash on a long weekend. I spent 3 more weekends on the floors, rented the sander, bought the finish, got it wrong the first time and sanded it back down and started over. It cost me $340 out of pocket. It looked exactly the way I wanted when I was done. I had one spare key. I gave it to my parents for actual emergencies. Burst pipe. Locked out. Something that couldn't wait. That was the understanding, or at least, I thought it was. It turns out emergency meant something very different to them than it did to me. My sister Emily is 31. She got married at 27 to a man with a good income and a house in the suburbs, and for 4 years that was the life she lived. When the marriage ended this past spring, she moved out of that house and into what her attorney called a transitional period. Her divorce proceedings were still active. There were shared assets being divided, and somewhere in that process, there was a temporary housing arrangement tied to the marital estate money set aside specifically to cover her living costs while things were sorted out. My parents knew this. They had to. They were in every conversation about Emily's divorce because that is how our family works. Emily's problems are everyone's problems, and everyone's resources are Emily's resources. They never once asked whether I had anywhere else to be. The call came in at 6:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone log later that night when I was trying to piece together how much my parents had known and when. The answer was everything, and well before I walked through that door. My mother didn't call to ask. She called to explain. There's a difference, and she has never confused the two. We used the spare key, she said. Emily needed somewhere to land. It's only temporary. You know how she is right now, she's devastated. Family helps family, Megan. That's what we do. No pause for my response. No space for a question. The words came out in a single prepared block, the way you talk when you've already decided the other person's answer doesn't change anything. I asked one question. When were you going to tell me? She said, we're telling you now. I stood in my own kitchen, looking at the wine ring on my floor, and I did not say what I was thinking. I said I needed to call her back. She told me not to make this into something it wasn't. Then she hung up. I pulled up my call log. I went back 72 hours. No missed calls from either parent. No texts. No voicemails. Nothing in the thread with my mother except a recipe she'd forwarded 3 weeks earlier. They had arranged this, coordinated it, and executed it without a single attempt to reach me first. The call at 6:47 p.m. wasn't notification. It was a fait accompli dressed up as communication. That was the first thing that hardened something in me. The second thing was the key. When Emily answered the door of my own apartment, which was its own specific kind of wrong, I noticed she was holding a key. Not the spare I'd given my parents. This one was newer. The cuts were cleaner, the metal brighter, the plastic head a different color from the original. Someone had made a copy. I didn't say anything about it that night, but I took a photo of it when Emily set it down on my counter, and I sat with what that meant. The spare I'd given my parents was for emergencies, burst pipe, locked out, something that couldn't wait. It was not meant to be duplicated. It was not meant to be handed to anyone. And if someone had cut a new key from it without telling me, that wasn't a favor. That was a decision made about my home, using access I had extended in trust, without my knowledge and without my consent. I checked my lease that evening. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Unauthorized key duplication by or on behalf of a tenant constitutes a material lease violation. If a third party gained access via a duplicated key and caused damage, the liability could fall on me, the tenant of record, unless I could demonstrate I had no knowledge of or consent to the duplication. That key wasn't just an overstep, it was a liability I hadn't agreed to carry. And it had been sitting on my kitchen counter like it belonged there. I gave Emily until that same evening. I knocked on my own bedroom door. She'd taken it without asking, which should have surprised me and didn't, and I told her, as clearly as I knew how, that she needed to find somewhere else to stay. I wasn't cruel about it. I wasn't loud. I said I understood she was going through something hard, and I was sorry about that, and she still needed to leave by the weekend. Emily was unpacking when I walked in. Not pausing, not stopping, actively unpacking, lifting folded clothes out of the second suitcase and placing them into my dresser drawer like she was settling into a hotel she'd already paid for. She looked up when I spoke. She didn't look surprised. She looked inconvenienced. "I thought you'd be supportive," she said. I told her support didn't mean handing over my apartment without being asked. She set down the shirt she was holding and looked at me the way she's looked at me since we were children, like I was a problem she hadn't gotten around to solving yet. Her skincare products were already lined up on my bathroom counter in a specific order. Her shampoo was in my shower. She had been here less than 8 hours, and she had already distributed herself across every surface of the space I paid for. "Mom already told me this was fine," she said, and went back to unpacking. I noticed the scratch on my way out of the room. A thin line running from the base of the dresser toward the window, where she dragged the suitcase across the hardwood without a pad. About 14 inches long, right through the section I'd had to sand back and redo. I went to the kitchen and called my parents. My father answered first, but my mother took over within seconds. The call lasted 34 minutes. I know because I checked afterward, the same way I'd been checking everything since 6:47 p.m. She opened with Emily's state of mind. She moved through the divorce, the stress, the humiliation of starting over. She talked about what family was supposed to mean. And then, when I held my position calmly, the same sentence in different forms, "She cannot stay here without my consent." My mother shifted gears in the way she always does when the facts aren't working for her. "You always have to make everything about yourself," she said. I didn't respond. "Emily is devastated. She has nothing right now. And you're standing there worried about a floor." There it was. Not a floor. My floor. The one I had sanded back and refinished by hand because it mattered to me and no one was going to do it for me. She said it like the $340 and the 3 weekends were a personality flaw. My father said nothing for the last 20 minutes of the call. Not agreement, not disagreement, just silence, which in our family has always meant the same thing as going along. My mother's last line before she hung up: "I didn't raise you to choose a floor over your sister." I set my phone down on the kitchen counter, next to the wine ring that still hadn't been wiped up. I had been asking. I had been reasonable. I had been calm. It wasn't working. 2 weeks passed. Emily did not leave. She stopped pretending she was going to. The suitcases that had been blocking my hallway were now emptied and stored under my bed, which I was no longer sleeping in because she had taken the bedroom and I had taken the couch without either of us ever discussing it. That was how things worked in my family. The path of least resistance was always paved with my convenience. By the end of the first week, she had rearranged the living room. The couch was at a different angle. The side table I kept next to it had been moved to make room for her things. A friend of hers came over twice, a woman I'd never met, who walked through my apartment like a guest in Emily's space rather than an uninvited visitor in mine. I came home both evenings to the smell of food I hadn't cooked and a sink full of dishes I hadn't dirtied. The balcony was worse. My lease has a no smoking clause. It's written plainly in Section 3, and I had agreed to it without hesitation because I don't smoke, and I had no reason to expect anyone else would be living there. Emily smoked on the balcony every evening around 9. I mentioned it once. She said she'd cracked the door, so it didn't count. I started photographing things. Not dramatically, I wasn't building a case yet, or at least I wasn't letting myself think of it that way. I was just documenting. The rearranged furniture, the new scratch near the window that ran parallel to the one from the first night, another 14 inches of damage across a floor I had refinished by hand. The cigarette butts on the balcony ledge. I took each photo with my phone, let it timestamp automatically, and saved them to a folder I labeled with the date I started it. Then I found the mirror. The bathroom mirror, A frameless panel I'd replaced myself 8 months earlier because the original had a chip in the lower corner was shattered on the lower left side. Not a crack. A clean break, like something had hit it with force. Emily said she didn't know how it happened. She said it like she was commenting on the weather. The wine ring had dried and set into the hardwood. I tried to clean it in the first few days, but the tannins had already pulled into the grain. It was permanent without refinishing. I photographed that too. That same evening, I opened Instagram. Emily had posted a story. No name, no tag, but the detail was specific enough that 3 of my cousins had already responded to it. She wrote about being technically homeless while her sister lost her mind over some scratches on a floor. She added that some people just don't know what family means. The post had 47 responses by the time I saw it. I screenshotted it at 9:03 p.m., 11 minutes after it went up. I sat with that for a long moment. She had taken my bedroom, rearranged my living room, cracked my mirror, stained my floor, smoked on my balcony in violation of my lease, brought strangers into my apartment, and now she was telling 47 people, including family members who knew exactly who she meant, that I was the problem. I called Mr. Hargrove the next morning. I kept it factual. I told him another person had been occupying the apartment for 2 weeks without authorization, that she had been given access via a duplicated key I hadn't consented to, and that there was documented damage to the floor and the bathroom mirror. I told him I was trying to resolve it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Megan, I need you to understand something. She's not on the lease. You are. If she stays long enough without written authorization, you start building a case for implied tenancy, and that makes removal significantly harder. For both of us." I asked what he could do to help. "I'll give you a written statement," he said, "confirming you're the sole authorized tenant, confirming no subletting or guest authorization was ever granted. If this goes further, you'll want that on paper." I thanked him and wrote down everything he'd said. He had just handed me the second piece of the case I was still pretending I wasn't building. On a Sunday evening, 3 weeks after Emily moved into my apartment without asking, I sat down at my kitchen table and laid out everything I had. The lease. 2 years old, renewed once. My name on every line where a name was required. No other occupant listed. No subletting clause invoked. Just Megan, sole tenant, responsible for the unit and everything in it. Mr. Hargrove's written statement, which had arrived by email 2 days after our call, printed and signed. 3 short paragraphs confirming I was the sole authorized occupant of the unit, that no guest or subletting authorization had ever been granted, and that the key duplication had occurred without his knowledge or consent as property owner. He had not been asked to overstate anything. He simply wrote what was true. My phone records. 72 hours before Emily arrived, not a single incoming call or text from either parent. The consent they assumed they could give on my behalf had never been discussed with me. The records were 3 pages, highlighted in 2 places. The time-stamped photographs, 12 of them, organized by date. The wine ring. The first floor scratch from the night Emily arrived. The second scratch near the window. The broken mirror. The cigarette butts on the balcony ledge. The rearranged furniture. Each one dated, each one showing damage to a space I was legally responsible for and had not authorized anyone else to occupy. Emily's Instagram screenshots. 2 of them the original story and a comment thread where a cousin had tagged another cousin, making the social radius of the post very clear. 47 responses. My name not written, but the floor detail made identification possible for anyone in our family. I had been described as someone who didn't know what family meant by a person living in my apartment without my permission. In the draft incident report I had written out by hand the night before, based on the non-emergency line's instructions. I had not filed it yet. I was going to file it tonight. 6 items. I looked at all of them arranged across my kitchen table, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not anger, but the particular weight of having to document your own life in order to defend it. My hands were steadier than I thought they'd be. That surprised me. I called the non-emergency line at 8:15 p.m. The officer I spoke with was methodical and unhurried. I walked him through the timeline. Spare key given to parents for emergencies. Key duplicated without my knowledge. Sister placed in apartment without my consent. 2 weeks of occupation. Documented damage. Landlord confirmation of sole tenancy. He asked 2 clarifying questions. Then he went quiet for a moment. "Ma'am," he said, "unauthorized entry into a leased dwelling using a duplicated key, without the tenant's knowledge or consent, that's breaking and entering." It may be civil rather than criminal depending on how it proceeds, but that's the terminology we're working with. I wrote those words down exactly. Breaking and entering. Not a family favor, not a temporary arrangement, not family helping family. The officer filed the incident report, gave me a case number, and noted that the situation could escalate to civil proceedings if the occupant refused to vacate. After I hung up, I looked at the 6 items on my table, now 7 with the incident report number written on a notepad beside them. Everything had been there from the first night. The lease, the photos, the records. I had just needed to let myself see what they added up to. I found a tenants' rights attorney through a referral from a coworker who had dealt with a landlord dispute the year before. The consultation was 30 minutes and cost $75. I brought the folder. He went through it without saying much. The lease, the landlord's statement, the phone records, the incident report, the photos. He spent the most time on the lease. When he looked up, he didn't look surprised by any of it. He looked like a man who had seen this exact folder many times before, assembled by many different people who had all waited longer than they should have. He told me the situation was straightforward on paper. My name was the only name on the lease. The key had been duplicated and used without my consent. There was documented damage. There was a landlord willing to testify. The incident report was already on record. What was not straightforward was time. Every week she stays, he said. You move closer to an implied tenancy argument. She's been there over 3 weeks. If this reaches 6 or 8, her attorney, if she gets one, can start making the case that you tacitly accepted the arrangement. That weakens your position and complicates removal. The filing fee for a formal complaint was $180. Timeline to a preliminary hearing was 3 to 5 weeks. He also noted, almost as an aside, that Emily's Instagram posts, if they contained statements attributable to me by mutual acquaintances, could constitute defamation. He said I didn't need to pursue that separately. The posts were already useful as evidence of intent and character. Then he said the thing I hadn't considered. Your parents provided the key. They facilitated the entry. If you're filing a complaint, they can be named in it. He paused. It's worth knowing that before you decide how far you want to take this. I thought about that on the drive home. My parents arrived 2 days later, unannounced, which I should have expected and didn't. They came together, which meant it was coordinated. My mother sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I had laid out the folders 6 days earlier, and presented what she framed as a reasonable compromise. Let Emily stay through the end of the divorce proceedings. 4 months, maybe less. In exchange, they would reimburse me for the inconvenience. My father set an envelope on the table. I didn't pick it up. My mother said, "There's $200 in there. For the floor, or whatever you need." I looked at that envelope for a moment. $200. For a cracked mirror, a stained and scratched floor, 3 weeks on my own couch, a police report, a $75 attorney consultation, and a $180 filing fee I hadn't paid yet but was going to. $200, placed on my table like a period at the end of a sentence I hadn't agreed to write. I asked one question. Did you ask me before you gave her the key? My mother looked at me. We didn't think we needed to. That was it. That was the sentence. Not a mistake she was correcting, not something she'd done wrong that she was trying to fix. She genuinely had not thought she needed my permission to give someone else access to my home. 4 words we didn't think, and everything I had been trying to resolve through conversation became something that conversation could not fix. I looked at the envelope on my table. I did not touch it. I'll be in touch, I said. My father stood up first. He didn't look at the envelope. He didn't look at me. He walked to the door and waited for my mother, and neither of them said another word on the way out. I picked up my phone and called the attorney. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at 9. I arrived at 25 past 8 and sat in one of the plastic chairs along the hallway wall with my folder on my lap and nowhere in particular to look. My parents arrived at 8:50 with Emily between them. They came through the main doors together, 3 across. My mother's hand on Emily's arm like she was escorting her into something difficult rather than something she had caused. Emily was in a blazer I recognized. She'd borrowed it from my mother's closet once, years ago, for a job interview she hadn't gotten. She looked composed. She was on her phone when they walked in, and she was still on her phone when they sat down across the hall from me. She didn't look worried. That was the most telling thing in the room. Her attorney introduced himself to mine near the water fountain. They exchanged the kind of professional pleasantries that meant nothing. My parents did not look at me directly. My father sat with his hands on his knees, looking at the floor. My mother looked at everything except what was in front of her. Mr. Hargrove arrived at 5 to 9. He nodded at me from across the hall and took a seat near the gallery entrance. I had not asked him to come. He had offered. The hearing itself was civil and brief in the way that preliminary proceedings are brief not because the matter was simple, but because the paperwork did most of the talking before anyone opened their mouth. My attorney submitted the lease first. The judge reviewed it. My name, the unit address, the term, the renewal, the no subletting clause, the authorized occupant field with exactly one entry. Emily's attorney made the argument that the arrangement had been a mutual family decision, temporary in nature, made under circumstances of personal hardship. He used the phrase informal family agreement twice. The judge looked up from the lease after the second time and said, "I see one name here. Whose name is on this lease?" My attorney said, "My client's." "Only my client's." Mr. Hargrove was called to give a brief verbal confirmation. He stood, identified himself as the property owner, and stated in 3 sentences that no subletting authorization had ever been granted for the unit. No additional occupant had ever been approved, and the duplicated key had been made without his knowledge. He sat back down. The whole thing took less than 2 minutes, and it landed in that courtroom like something much heavier than 2 minutes. Then Emily's attorney raised the hardship argument again. She had nowhere to go. The divorce had left her without stable housing. The family had acted out of necessity. My attorney submitted a single document. It was a record from Emily's divorce proceedings, part of the shared asset disclosure showing a temporary housing allowance tied to the marital estate. Money set aside specifically to cover her living costs during the transitional period. The number was on the page. It had been available to her since the proceedings began. She had somewhere to go. She had always had somewhere to go. Emily's attorney said nothing for a moment. Emily stopped looking at her phone. The screenshots came in after that. My attorney presented them as part of the damages and defamation record, Emily's Instagram story, the comment thread, the 47 responses, the cousin tags that made identification unambiguous to anyone in our family's social circle. The post was displayed on a screen in the hearing room. The judge noted it without ruling on the defamation question, but confirmed it was relevant to the damages claim. Emily looked at her own words on that screen and went very still. The composure she had walked in with the blazer, the phone, the unbothered expression didn't collapse all at once. It just went quiet. The way a room goes quiet when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. The judge issued the removal order. Emily had 72 hours to vacate the premises, return all keys, and leave the unit in its current condition pending a damages assessment. Her attorney requested an extension. The judge denied it. The hallway afterward was worse than the hearing. Emily came out of the courtroom ahead of her attorney and walked straight toward me. My mother was behind her. My father was behind my mother. Emily's face had moved past composure into something rawer, and when she stopped in front of me there were 2 courthouse clerks at the far end of the hall. Mr. Hargrove near the door, and my parents close enough to hear every word. "You've destroyed this family," she said. "You know that? I had nowhere to go, and you took me to court. Family helps family, Megan. That's what we do." I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the suitcases in my hallway, the wine ring, the scratched floor, the mirror, the Instagram post, the envelope with $200 that I had never touched. "The judge disagrees," I said. She stared at me. I held it. My mother was crying quietly behind her. My father was not. He was looking at the floor, the same way he had looked at the floor in my apartment when he put the envelope on my table. I think he had known for a while how this was going to end. I think he had just been waiting to see if I would blink first. I hadn't. Emily was gone by Thursday afternoon, 61 hours after the order was issued, not 72, which told me she had been ready to leave faster than she'd let on. I walked through the apartment the way you walk through a space that has been returned to you after someone else lived in it. Slowly, room by room, with my phone out. The wine ring was still in the hardwood. The 2 floor scratches were still there, the first from the night she arrived, the second from the week after. The bathroom mirror was still cracked in the lower left corner. I photographed all of it, new timestamps, for the damages filing. Same folder, same method, different date. Behind the bathroom cabinet, pushed into the gap between the cabinet base and the wall, I found one of Emily's earrings. A small gold hoop. I held it for a moment, then put it in an envelope, wrote her name on the front, and mailed it. No note. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said on the record, and I didn't need to say it again. My mother texted 2 days after the hearing. Not an apology, an opening. I hope we can move past this, she wrote. As though moving past something was a direction we could both agree to walk without first agreeing on what it was. I thought about it for a day. Then I wrote back, I'm open to a relationship where my home is mine. She didn't respond. I hadn't expected her to. My father called that evening. He didn't lead with anything strategic. He just said, I'm sorry we put you in that position. Not a full accounting, not an acknowledgement of every specific thing they had done. But it was the first sentence any member of my family had said that named what had actually happened, not what Emily needed, not what family was supposed to mean, not what I should have been willing to give. Just, we put you in that position, and I'm sorry. I told him I hurt him. That was all I said. I had the locks changed the following week. Standard procedure after any unauthorized key duplication, the locksmith said it like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, which I suppose it was. I had one key cut. 1. I keep it on the same ring as my car key, where I know exactly where it is at all times. My parents always said family helps family. They weren't wrong about that. They just had the wrong definition of family and the wrong definition of help. I know what both words mean now. More importantly, I know what they mean inside my own home. And I'm the only one who gets to decide that.